Okay, here we go. Okay, so today's topic is very fundamental. It's actually a starting point. We just finished 8 classes on the significance of a relationship and how they pertain to our relationship with Hashem, right, with God. We finished 8 classes on that. And today we're going to spend about 2 or 3 classes discussing this topic, which is essentially, it's titled Individualism versus Being Alone. Okay, what does that mean? Meaning, we need to understand the significance of being an individual. Hey, Mazal, how are you? You're in Israel? Sorry, I had to stop for a second.
You know where I could find boxes?
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey, Ray, what's
Yeah, I'm
going
in
on?
Israel.
Yeah,
Thank you.
welcome. Okay, so the topic of today is basically an individual, meaning there's a certain significance to being an individual, and we need to define what that is versus being alone. Like if you're an individual, you can catch yourself being. All right, one second, guys, mute yourselves. Let me just, I'll pause. Yeah. We'll start off by defining why it's important to have a healthy sense of self in life or in a relationship. Meaning, we're going to discuss today, the goal of today's class is really becoming more emotionally independent from within, because that's something that a lot of our communities, a lot of our kids, a lot of our students are missing, which is, a healthy sense of emotional independence. We kind of don't have the balance between emotional, independence and dependency. It's a very gray place where we have a very hard time defining ourselves. Okay. Okay, a few more people have to turn the camera on because I'm talking to a bunch of names. All right. So today we're gonna start off. That's better. We're gonna start off, not you, Mo. You shut off your camera. We're gonna start off by defining. Who's that? We're gonna start off by defining what does it mean to what the reason is.
But I also want to make some breakfast. Bring them to the kitchen.
One second.
No, we can't listen.
Okay, there you go. We're going to start off by defining why a healthy sense of self is important, what the setbacks are. Then we'll talk about the roots of individualism in the Torah, meaning in the Bible. Like, why do you need to be an independent? What's important about the individual? Then we'll talk about the challenges of it. Okay, so let's get going. So basically, now that I see I gave everybody basically 5 minutes to get on board, we'll discuss 6 reasons why it's important to have a healthy sense of self. Number 1, when you have a healthy sense of self, right? Then, or if you don't have it, let's talk about it in terms of relationship. What happens when you don't have a healthy sense of self? So essentially what happens is you get absorbed by the relationship that you're in. Let's say you're dating or you're married or something like that. You don't have a sense of yourself. You get absorbed by the relationship that you're in, and then you completely lose identity. What does that lead? What does that lead to? And we've spoken about this in the past classes. What that leads to is a very high level of instability. Why is that so? Because now your whole self-definition is dependent on someone else. What they think of you is how you determine yourself. If we don't have a sense of self, then what other people say, be it in a marriage, be it in dating, be it in friendship, be it in work, that will determine who I am. And that's fine if we lived in a utopian world where everybody was perfect, but it's not as such. So basically what ends up happening is we have a very big weakness of stability, and there's a part of our life that we can't control. Why? Because now all of our identity is based on what other people say. Because you don't have a sense of self, you essentially don't exist. So you're turning to other people to define yourself. And I'm going to put it a little harshly, but basically the idea is, if they're happy with me, then I'm happy with me. If my boss is happy with me, then I'm happy with me. If my friends are happy with me, then I'm happy with me. If my spouse, my husband, my wife, is happy with me, then I'm happy with me. So that leads, what does that create? That creates a major sense of instability in the person's life, right? I'm just kind of browsing the top. We're going to give 6 reasons why having a sense of self and identity is so important to yourself from a selfish reason. The first reason is because you lend yourself to a massive level of instability. Your determination of who you are is always dependent on what other people say. They like you, you're good. They don't like you, you're not good. Okay? That's number one. Number two is you're setting yourself up for a big place of Kayla's on board. You're setting yourself up for a big sense of losing the places that give you support. For example, if you get absorbed into a relationship, and let's dramatize it a little bit. Let's create a mother that we all know that loses herself and identifies herself just by her kids and children's success. What happens? Okay. What happens is in the early stages, all the places that used to support her friends, her work, her hobbies, and so on and so forth are now pushed aside. There's no more room for it. Okay. So what, because she's essentially doesn't doesn't have a sense of self, now she's simply getting absorbed by whatever relationship she's in, and any place that used to be a sense of support is now no longer there. You always have it, right? You always have it, like someone who starts dating and they kind of disregard their friends, right? You have someone who's dating and they disregard their friends, and then they break up, and then they want to go back to being friends with their friends, but their friends are like, hey, you weren't there, you kind of disappeared. What happens when you lose your sense of self and you completely invalidate everything that was important to you? Those places that used to be a sense of stability for you are no longer there. Okay, so we're just talking about defining why it's important to have a sense of self. We'll explain exactly what that is and what that identity is, and we'll also take a step into where in the Torah that exists. Like, where does sense of self exist? But just now we're kind of pointing out where the issues with it are. Any questions? And I'll be happy to pause for a second. Okay, number 3.
Rabbi, are
Yeah,
you saying that, that things that you used to like to do, you don't do anymore because you were so involved in the relationship and that
exactly.
you lost what was important to you?
Exactly. You're right. Right, exactly. What happens to people is they totally get absorbed in a situation, in work, in a relationship, and everything that was significant to them that helped them get to who they are, they kind of drop, which would work in a utopian world, but that's not how life is. So, but when you retain a sense of self, you're able to maintain your relationship, your friendship, your work, and also have those things that help build you and that help get you to where you are. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's nice for the moment, but you need to maintain who you are. Exactly. So that's the point. Number 3 is that what happens when a person loses a sense of identity or a sense of self is that your world revolves around the person that's absorbing you. So for example, if you're dating someone or you're married to someone or you're at work or something like that, you kind of lose your voice. You lose your opinion. Why is that so? And this is important to understand. Because the other person, because you're looking at the other person to absorb you, you're so scared of voicing something that would be against like against who they are, that you just kind of keep quiet. Because since I'm absorbed by the other person, I lose my sense of identity, and my whole identity is just by those people. If I say something that they don't like, I kind of deteriorate. Okay, so you become scared to voice your opinion, because what happens if I say something they don't like? Or what happens, and this is not just to dating, I'll broaden it a little bit. This is also to to a parent situation. if you're so emotionally dependent on your parents or anybody, on anyone, on any factor, if you're so emotionally dependent on your parents, then you're scared to voice your opinion, because if they disagree with you, you'll completely lose your sense of self. There's nothing left to you. There's no identity left to the person. Okay, does that resonate? You guys hear that point? Okay. Number 4 is what's the kind of detriment of not having a sense of independence or a sense of self is you don't grow as much as a person. Why is that so? Because when you're spending all of your free time kind of in the same routine because that's what's comfortable for others, there's an entire part of you that doesn't get developed. Okay, it actually stunts your creativity. That means there's a whole side of you, there's a whole part of you that's never been developed. Why is that so? Because you're so busy conforming to others. Now, we're not talking about, and you guys have been in my classes for a long time. You understand that we're not talking about just like veering off and doing something crazy. We're just talking about having the courage in this class today to identify your sense of self. Because if you don't identify it, as for what we're talking about now, you lose the creativity, you lose the points that identify you as you. Why? Because you're so busy being absorbed in your family, in your community, in what you feel is the Torah, what you feel is the Torah, what you feel Hashem wants for you. You lose your sense of identity, and that entire creativity of who you're supposed to be is lost. Never came out to fruition because you're so busy trying to be that yes person. Okay, so essentially, there's a whole side of you that's not being developed.
Can you
Okay.
repeat that last part?
In
Like,
order,
you're saying a person can lose themselves even to religion?
yeah, of course, 100%. There's no question about it. Meaning, if you, we'll talk about it in like a few steps, but if there's nothing that's supposed to be stronger than your sense of identity. Okay, and we'll talk about it because Hashem, right? God created every person as a complete individual. And if you squash your identity, then essentially you're kind of squashing the whole reason Hashem created you. Okay, so even from a religious perspective, if you just copy and paste, you look at your rabbis, you look at your rebbitzins, you look at your community, and you say, "This is what I have to be," without identifying yourself, you've completely missed the boat of what Hashem wants. There's no question about it.
But what if your sense of self is to be religious?
We're not talking about not being religious. We're talking about identifying yourself within the religion. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but religion is a box. And the box is given to everybody. The individual is meant to find himself outside of the box, right? For example, we'll talk about it in a little bit. Like the halakha says, you should keep Shabbat, right? Keep Shabbat. Does the halakha tell you what to cook on Shabbat? Does it tell you what to wear on Shabbat? Does it tell you what to sing on Shabbat? No, it doesn't tell you. All those are part of your identity. What is your family like? What do you guys resonate with? But if you look towards someone else and say, this is what we should cook, this is what we should eat, this is what we should sing, this is how we should dress, you've completely lost your sense of identity, and you've essentially lost your individuality with Hashem. And and we'll talk about it a little bit. Right now, I'm just kind of identifying what the flaws are of not having the courage to being independent. Any questions before I go on?
Yeah, can I ask a question, Rabbi?
Sure.
Okay, so no, this is actually something I was thinking about a lot this week because our last class was about like self-discovery. So I feel like, let's say like you're very like broad in terms of like the people that you surround yourself with. So like one day you can be hanging out with people who like live in Bnei Brak and like wear like tights and like just they're like the whole 9 yards. And then on the other hand, you could also have like friend groups who are like more chill and lax and like, I don't know, like a broad spectrum. But like if you're like in that type of position where like you're connected to like, I don't know, like a bunch of like broad people like within Judaism and like you flow with different people, like where does that kind of place you? Because like you may not be like as like loose as that or like as religious as that. So it's just like, weird to like kind of like, you understand where I'm trying to get at with this question, or not
Well,
so much?
I understand that there's a sense of broadness, right? But
Mhm.
it shouldn't have to affect your identification, meaning like, I think that's the beauty of the Shvatim, of the tribes, is every tribe had their own independent level of serving Hashem, but you still have to be very strong in your identity. You can get, okay, let's talk about this for a second. What is sinat chinam? Sinat chinam, right? Sinat chinam, it says the very apropos to Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, right? The sinat chinam, it means hatred for no reason, and that's why the temple was destroyed. What does that mean, hatred for no reason? Who hates someone for no reason? You always have a reason. His nose is big, his parking is not good, his clothes are not, you always have a reason. Sinat chinam means that you hate someone for a reason, but God says that's not a reason. What does that mean? We all have these these reasons to separate from each other. He's Ashkenaz, he's Sfard, he's Persian, he's Moroccan, he's Jewish, he's not Jewish, all these kind of things. We all have these points to separate us from each other, but Hashem doesn't see it as such. An individual is someone who's able to be completely confident in their identity and yet able to work with all of Hashem's children. So, and we'll talk about it, like independence and so on and so forth comes from confidence. Okay, I'm just getting a question. Do you guys have any questions on that?
Rabbi, I have a question about something you said earlier.
Yeah, what point?
So, about someone who defines themselves in a way where they only, like, for example, they only have relationships with their family, or they only work, or they
Right.
only have a relationship with a significant other. So
Right.
someone who has defined, say, like 3 points of their identity as work, family, spouse, and they don't exist outside of those identities.
Right.
How do you maneuver someone who you had a relationship with prior, but that's now how they are?
Meaning someone that you've been close with in the past and now
Yeah.
that you had to move on.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way to answer that is in a very selfish way. Like relationships, and then this is going to be a little harsh, but relationships have to be measured to the extent that they're good for you. Any relationship you have in your life is only to the extent that it's good for you. So if it's someone that you've dated in the past, or a friend, or a business, or even a family member, the extent that you allow them into your life, and this is where your sense of independence really has to come in. And coming, I know, I don't want to say, but coming from LA and the Persian community, already revealing too
Fair.
much on the question.
No, fair.
Coming from that community, sense of self really gets lost. And I've been dealing with it for the past 15, 20 years. And the answer to that question is any relationship you've had in the past is only allowed into your life in as much as it's productive for you. Okay. Now, there are certain people that you don't have to have a relationship with, but you just have to be cordial and a functioning relationship. That's different. That's different. That's different. There's certain people that are in your life that you can't, and you can't control or something like that. They're not necessarily productive, and they might even be destructive. So you have to gauge that a different way. Okay. But your sense of independence must always be able to determine this person is healthy for me, this person is not. This person is allowed into my life, this person is not.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
That is a complete rule of thumb. There are people in your life that will be involved in your life and you just don't have a choice, but doesn't mean they can get in. They're just kind of, I would call it in a way, bystanders. Okay. Okay, let's go on, guys. We only have like 6 minutes, and I'm just trying to get a part of, through part 1A of class. Another part, and this is very important, guys, towards this, the sense of independence and definition in your life is you think that by being so dependent on your spouse, you're being a good wife or a good husband, when in reality, you're actually hurting the relationship. And why is that so? We all know the concept of nida, right? Which means that sometimes distance is healthy. There's attraction and chemistry and things that are unknown, okay? When a person maintains their sense of independence, there's always a part of you in the relationship that needs to be explored, okay? There's always a part of you in the relationship that needs to be explored. Your husband or your wife always needs to find out more about you and needs to be kind of engaged with the part of you that they don't know. And that comes from independence. That comes because there's a part of you that's still growing as a person, whether it's 6 months of marriage or 10 months of marriage or a year or 20 years or 30 years. There's always a part of you that needs to be explored. And that keeps the relationship young and fresh. Just like the concept of nida, that distance creates closeness, right? So too, when all the cards are out, there's nothing interesting anymore. There's nothing for me to pursue. There's nothing for me to see or know. But when there's something that like I can still admire and study and learn, that actually keeps the relationship young. Where does that come from? That comes from the sense of independence. That comes from the courage and the self-esteem to still retain a sense of you. Even within having kids, even within being married, even within work, there's always a part of you that kind of needs to be discovered. So that it's actually healthier for the relationship when the person has a sense of self. Now, beyond the fact that we've talked about in the past, that when you don't have a sense of me, when you don't have a sense of identification, then the love that you receive never has value. Because no matter how much love they give to you, you never value it because you think you don't deserve it. So that deteriorates the relationship within. That's kind of a separate point. I'm just talking about the fact that this hurts the relationship because it actually helps keep the relationship young. Okay, and that's important to understand because, we fall into this routine of just kind of giving ourselves over to our spouses, to our kids, to our work, to our friends, and so on and so forth. We don't return it. We don't retain a sense of self, and then those things kind of turn stale. Okay, any questions on that point before I get into the last one? No? Okay, let's move on. The last point that no, okay, the last point is very simple, is that, and this is just like kind of looking down the line, when you retain a sense of self, so essentially at the later stages in your life, when your children have kind of moved on, you still see yourself as a valuable person. Okay, and that's very important. I know most of us are young on the class and like we're all kind of like before the game type of thing, but let's understand that when that point comes and the children leave the house, if you never had a sense of self, you're not going to discover it at age 55, 60, or whatever age it is. If you've never had it until that point, you're not. What happens then? What happens then is at that stage in our life, we kind of get desperate, right? And we do weird and crazy things. But if we develop our sense of self from the beginning, meaning if I have value, independent of my husband, independent of my wife, independent of my kids, independent of my work, family, I just have value as a servant of Hashem, as a person, then that retains forever. And that gives the person we're looking to create an emotionally stable person. And the only way that's going to happen is if you from the beginning, if we, myself, Chaim Levy, from the beginning, has a sense of stability and a sense of value from day one. Okay, so I'll just recap this in the last minute. I'll just move on to the next topic. I didn't think it was going to take so long, but okay. So we gave basically 6 reasons of why having a sense of self is so important to the person. Okay. Number 1 is it creates a sense of stability, because if your sense of self comes from someone else, then your life is headed for a massive sense of instability. Number 2 is the relationships that got you to where you are, they get lost because you're so absorbed in one specific place. Number 3 is you're scared to have a sense of self, of voice. Why is that so? Because your whole identification is by the other person. You're kind of scared to even say something. Okay, number 4 is you don't grow as much as a person because you're stunted. Okay, your creativity is stunted. Everything that you have is stunted. Your passion is stunted because, again, you identify by that person. There's no sense of self. Number 5 is your relationship with your partner suffers because they want, we spoke about this in the past class. Relationships are built on exploration. When there's nothing left for them to explore within you, the relationship turns stale. But when you have a sense of self, there's always something exciting about you. Okay, number 6, and that's later on in life, is on the other side, is if you don't have a sense of self from the beginning, on the other side of the spectrum, you kind of, when the kids leave or you're not working or something to that extent, you kind of lose your identity. Okay, so I know I'm going over in like a minute, but I'll just bring the next topic in, and God willing, next week we'll speak about the next move forward of it. Where do we find the individualism in the Torah? Where do we find that there's an idea of the significance of being an individual from the Torah's perspective? So I'll give one thing and then we'll stop. So it says, the Zohar says, the Kabbalah says that when God gave the Torah, so Moshe Rabbeinu went to every single one of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and he positioned them in a place to see the giving of the Torah. What does that mean? That means everyone saw it in their own way. What does that mean on a broader spectrum? It means that, and this is important, guys, because it's a much bigger topic than we can talk about in the 60 seconds that I've allotted myself. Every person has their own view and relationship with God. We all keep the same laws. We all keep Shabbat. We all keep kosher, but we all have our own individual view and relationship with Hashem. When Moshe Rabbeinu placed us in a position to see Har Sinai, and every person was looking at it from a different angle, the Zohar says that represents the idea that you have your own individual relationship with Hashem. If you squash that, if you push that aside, if you look at something else as an example, but not just yourself, you're missing the exact point. You're missing the point. The core of your relationship with Hashem is missing. It's not what Hashem wants, and it's not what you're supposed to want. B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, next week we'll talk about it, and we'll take it from there. Okay, guys. Any questions before we end off? It's Sunday. Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes, Malka.
Yeah, one quick question. So how do we avoid creating this with like our kids, the future generation?
Super important question.
Yeah, like this independence and emotional dependence.
Okay, very important. As a parent, you really have to have the courage to allow your kids to make a mistake, which is something that's non-existent in the Persian community. Like, you have to allow your kids to trip and fall, because that's where they discover their independence. If you're so busy protecting them and being helicopter parents, they don't have their identity. You know whose identity they have? Whose identity they have? Allie. Let's pick on Allie today. Today's pick on Allie day.
Their parents.
Their parents' identity. That's right. Where's the umbrella? You always have an umbrella and a pencil, right? They have their parents' identity. So the best way to allow kids to develop their own identity is like we said, unless they're doing something dangerous, okay, physically dangerous, or unless they're doing something disrespectful, step out. They have an internal compass to figure it out. Do you know what I'm saying? Unless they're doing something disrespectful, which is something we should never stand for, or they're doing something dangerous, which is something we should never stand for. Beyond that, generally speaking, like step out, they'll figure it out. You know what I'm saying? The parent that does all their kids' homework and wakes their kids up for class and all these kind of things, you're stunting their growth. So it's a big thing to know how, and it's very hurtful because you could do better. Okay, guys. Any other questions? I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise,
Rabbi, I have a question.
yes.
So you're saying that your sense of self is all the different parts of you that Hashem made.
Right.
So it's not just your prayer. It could also be the fact that you
100%.
like to dance, and it could be the fact that you like to dance, or you like to hang out with your friends, you like to read, you like to contemplate, it could be all these things together. It's not just the quote unquote holy stuff.
Right. It's okay.
Everything.
So let's talk about this for a minute. And I guess we should kind of bring this up. It's, the holy stuff that you're talking about is the minute aspect of yourself.
But wouldn't
The
it be everything?
the holy stuff that you're talking about is the expression of who you are. Your prayer, your mitzvot is the expression of who you are. But derech eretz kadma la Torah, right? Derech eretz. Before you learn Torah, you have to have derech eretz. You have to have midot. You have to have character. You have to have a sense of self. The mitzvot are, by large, supposed to help you express yourself, but you have to have a sense of self first. If you don't have a sense of self, then the mitzvot that you're doing, they're valuable, but they're not nearly as valuable as if you had a sense of self. It's like your kid, coming home with a package that they gave him in school for something significant in your house, as opposed to them working on it in your house. Something you've developed on your own. So the mitzvot is how Hashem says, once you have a sense of self, I need you to express it this way. The tefillah, the brachot, Shabbat, niut, all of these things are meant to be an expression of who you are. You can never lose that. And I've gotten to 1/3 of the class today. God willing, we'll continue next week. But we have lost such a massive sense of expression of ourselves.
Yeah.
That our relationship with Hashem is like copy and paste. It's totally copy and paste. Instead of it, we need it because it keeps us in a structure, but it stops us from getting married because we're so scared of making a decision because we've never had to identify ourselves. It stops us from moving forward. It hurts us when we fall because we can't even recognize ourselves. It's such a big topic, the idea of identifying yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm getting a few chats. I have like 5 chats, which is a lot for this class because you guys never chat. Rabbi Levy, this class was terrible. Okay, I'll skip that one. I'm just kidding. How do we work on gaining a strong sense of self for ourselves? Okay, so I'm gonna go into that hopefully in the next classes. I'll just give the idea of how do you work on it. I have 3 ideas behind it, but one of them is, and this is going to be a little tough, take responsibility for yourself. Stop being a spoiled Jap. Okay? Take responsibility for yourself. You want to have a sense of self? Take responsibility for yourself. Stop being scared to fail. Stop being with lack of courage to make a decision. That's just on that, but we have a whole class. Hi, I believe you're just wondering how I get access to the Zoom link every week. Okay, just text me. I'll get it. Especially if community and culture worked against us growing up. Right, so that's another point. That's the next part of the class, which is why do we have such a hard time identifying the sense of self? Is because the Torah community and our parents are so into kind of lack of identification, which is in strength. And that's why we have such a hard time to it. So it doesn't mean we should just veer off. This is important, guys. We shouldn't just veer off and do something crazy. You need community. You need parents. You need friends. You need structure. That's the box that gives you the platform. But to identify yourself and to become great and who you need to be, it's always out of the box. And you need that courage that we were talking about to be that person. Okay. Before class ends, can you please go more into the point that you said about finding yourself outside the box? Okay, I guess we'll talk about it in next week's class. All right, guys, God willing, next week, Sunday, we'll pick it up. Feel free to text me and all that kind of stuff. Have a great week. I'll see you
Thank you,
guys.
Rabbi.
My pleasure. My pleasure, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great week. See you
Thank you,
soon.
Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.